Chapter 81 The Red Earl's Reward. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reading the newspaper is a great way to unwind. You get your dose of world news and kill some time, a real win-win. Paul unfolded the paper, and 2 wanted posters fluttered out. No big surprise, the Navy was always posting bounties. He picked them up for a look, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. The reward amount was insane. Everyone crowded around, and they were just as stunned. 1, 10, 100, 100 million, billion. A billion. Paul stammered, staring at the numbers. 1 billion. Boss, your bounty's through the roof. 1 billion berries. He rushed over to Charlotte, shouting. Huh? What's all the racket? Charlotte, lounging in a deck chair, barely opened one eye. Boss. Check it out. Your wanted poster. Paul practically shoved the newspaper at her. Charlotte glanced at it. Yup, her bounty. Pfft. What's the big deal about a 500 million raise? She tossed the paper back to Paul, totally unimpressed. He caught it, wide-eyed. Boss, don't you get it? Hitting 1 billion makes you a legend. Everyone in the world will know your name. He spread his arms dramatically. Charlotte chuckled. You think I care about that kind of fame? She arched an eyebrow, looking at him sideways. Paul scratched his head. She wasn't interested in anything except getting stronger, and maybe beautiful women. He glanced at the harem she'd assembled on the ship and just shook his head. Most pirate ships were all cannons and cutthroats. Charlotte's was practically a floating beauty pageant, with barely enough firepower to light a cigarette. Other captains crammed cannons into every nook and cranny. Charlotte watched Paul's expression. I have a feeling you're thinking something inappropriate. He broke out in a cold sweat. No way. You're my favorite boss. He forced an awkward, respectful smile. Charlotte rolled her eyes and closed them again. Paul took the hint. She was going to nap. Just as he was about to leave, another wanted poster slipped out of the newspaper. He picked it up, puzzled. This one featured 2 people. One was just a back view, but Paul recognized his boss instantly. But who was the other guy? He squinted at the name. Patrick Redfield, the Red Earl. Just reading the name gave Paul the creeps. But then he saw the bounty. 790 million berries. Paul shouted again, his eyes bugging out. This time, Charlotte shot straight up from the recliner. She snatched the paper and stared. Finally. Ha 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 ha. Charlotte burst into laughter, loud enough to turn heads. Everyone stared. They'd never seen her so happy. What was going on? They exchanged confused glances. It couldn't be anything bad, right? Not with Charlotte smiling like that. Ha 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 ha. Redfield, I finally one-upped you. Ha 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 ha. Charlotte yelled, waving the newspaper. The sound echoed across the water. Meanwhile, on a distant sea, a lone figure gripped a newspaper on a small boat. Veins bulged on his forehead and hands. Damn Navy. The Red Earl seethed, alone on his ship, glaring at the news. A wave of intense hockey surged from him, roiling the sea. Navy. Redfield muttered, eyes fixed on the horizon. Even though it was just open water, he knew the Sabaody archipelago lay ahead. With Charlotte's new bounty plastered everywhere, the Red Earl's name was now out there too. Patrick Redfield, the Red Earl, had the attention of every player on the Grand Line, and not for a good reason. 790 million berries was enough to make anyone greedy. A bounty that high on some nobody sent bounty hunters everywhere into a frenzy. The Navy had deliberately left out any background on the Red Earl, simply labeling him a criminal. That was all it took. Heh heh. Red Earl. I'm comin' for ya. That voice echoed in countless taverns. Charlotte's bounty, on the other hand, was mostly ignored. Nobody was crazy enough to mess with her. Well, almost nobody. The 2 bounty announcements sent the seas into chaos. Everyone was more terrified than ever of Charlotte's power. Killing over 1,000 people in Water 7 and walking away unscathed. Only a monster could do that. Ha 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 ha. Really? That protege of the Rock's pirates has done it again. Roger bellowed, waving his own copy of the newspaper. Rayleigh didn't even look up from his drink. Roger, don't you think the Rock's pirates are getting too strong? He frowned at Roger. Roger gulped down his liquor. Ha 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 ha. So what? I ain't afraid of them. Roger declared, his trademark arrogance shining through. Ha 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 ha. Rayleigh shook his head. That was Roger for you. But don't you think people under Rock's control have a miserable existence? Rayleigh asked Roger solemnly. Hearing that, Roger placed down his wine bottle. They were in the second half of the Grand Line. It was bold of them to sail practically under Rock's nose. Roger thought about those who lived under Rock's rule and went silent. He had witnessed firsthand the islands controlled by the Rock's pirates. Roger had seen the ruthless killings and endless riots. Chapter 82 Roger's Analysis. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There's nothing we can do about it right now. Raleigh looked at Roger, his expression serious. I just heard from Xia Qi that Rox is hunting for something called the King of Heaven, and he thinks he's onto something. The words hit Roger hard. His face instantly went grim as he turned to Rayleigh. You'll help me, right? Roger blurted out. Raleigh was taken aback, but he quickly nodded. Of course. Roger grinned, relieved. All right. Good. But I'm gonna wait. I'm waiting for Rox to screw up, and then we'll hit him where it hurts. He clapped Rayleigh on the shoulder, a fierce glint in his eyes that Rayleigh rarely saw. Raleigh smiled faintly. I'm with you all the way. They locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Ha 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 ha. The laughter drew the attention of the entire crew, who exchanged confused glances. Eventually, Roger calmed down. The Rock's pirates are a powder keg. They're just a bunch of guys using each other to get what they want. Take out Rox, and the whole thing collapses. He clenched his fist. Oh. You're not worried about Whitebeard, Golden Lion, Big Mom, or that bloody swordsman Rockefeller Charlotte? Raleigh asked. Those four are the heavy hitters in the Rock's crew right now. We might not even be able to take them all on. Roger just laughed. Nah, I'm not sweating it. We've met Whitebeard. He basically told us he wants out of the Rock's pirates, but he's too hung up on his code to do anything about it. He won't help Rox, but he won't stop us either. And we've seen Golden Lion. He's too ambitious to play second fiddle to anyone. If we off Rox, he'll probably thank us for it. Big Mom? Never met her, but I hear all she cares about is popping out kids and building her nation of Tato land. She won't lift a finger to help Rox. That just leaves Rockefeller Charlotte. Roger continued. Never met him either, but I hear Rox strong-armed him into joining. I bet he'd be thrilled to see Rox gone. Even if he doesn't help us, he'll probably stay out of it. Raleigh chuckled at Roger's confident analysis. So, that leaves us with Wang Ji, John Silveraxe, and that mysterious 7th Division captain, Haiten Muchan. Wang Ji and John Silveraxe are definitely Rox's guys, they've been with him since day one. But they're past their prime, we can handle them. You can take care of those two. As for Haiten Muchan, I hear Rox only gave him a squad because he wanted something Haiten had. He's weak anyway, no sweat. So, it all boils down to one thing, Rox. If we can take him out, his whole crew will fall apart. Roger declared, his voice ringing with conviction. The others were inspired by Roger's confidence. To hear him talk, the Rox pirates, a force that could challenge the Navy itself, were nothing more than a house of cards. That kind of boldness was rare. So, when do we do it? Raleigh asked, his own excitement building. Roger shook his head. Not yet. We wait. We wait until Rocks shows a sign of weakness. Then, we strike. Roger said forcefully. Raleigh grinned. He trusted Roger's judgment. We wait. When the lion gets tired, that's when the wolves start circling. Roger stared out at the endless sea. Charlotte, meanwhile, watched the shells explode around his ship, frustration mounting. This was the fourth time he'd been attacked by pirates. What was with the great rout? It was Pirate Central. In the New World, he'd sailed all the way to Fishman Island without seeing a single one, but ever since he left Water 7, he was getting ambushed every other day, and these guys were fearless. They just started blasting away without so much as a howdy-do. Where were their manners? A dozen shells rained down. Paul and Isaac rushed to the front, hacking at the projectiles with their swords, desperately trying to keep them from hitting the ship. This was all they had. If it got wrecked, they were stranded, especially out here, in the middle of nowhere. If they got stuck on some deserted island, their only hope would be a deus ex machina. Charlotte went to the railing and glared at the pirate ship. They were lobbing shells, and the other two guys were starting to pant. The pirates were smart, staying just out of range, harassing them from a distance. They were taking advantage of the fact that they had no cannons of their own. Maybe I should get some cannons, Charlotte muttered, rubbing his chin. Paul, who was nearby, gave his boss a blank look. Why did his boss say such dumb things? No. He couldn't be. His boss was a great swordsman. Paul shook off the thought and focused on deflecting the incoming shells. Time to end this charade. Charlotte said quietly, cracking his knuckles. Paul and Isaac exchanged excited glances. Were they about to see the great swordsman in action again? Under their eager gazes, Charlotte's eyes narrowed. A wave of pressure emanated from him, making it hard for Paul and Isaac to breathe. The two of them stared at Charlotte in awe. The great swordsman. That's the aura of a great swordsman. Charlotte watched the pirate shells coming their way, and drew his sword. In a flash, the blade left its sheath and a line of light streaked towards the pirate ship. Paul and Isaac gawked at the skyward arc of white light, their eyes practically bugging out of their heads. This is the dream of every swordsman. Chapter 83 The Legend of Aska Island. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Charlotte's sword was just a simple slash. No fancy armed color or overlord hockey, just a basic swing from a skilled swordsman. Yet, this simple attack instantly overwhelmed the incoming cannon fire. What is that? The pirates stared, mouths agape, as the slash cleaved the sea in two right before their eyes. They hadn't even finished loading their cannons, before their surprised cries could even escape their lips. The attack reached their ship. The vessel split open like tofu. Seriously? Boss, you just wrecked their whole ship with one hit? Paul asked, dumbfounded. Charlotte just glanced at him. Should I have left it intact for the holidays? She sheathed her sword and returned to her couch, not even bothering to look back. Paul was at a loss for words as he watched Charlotte relax, closing her eyes to rest. Was he really supposed to ask about salvaging treasure from the wreckage? Watching the pirate ship slowly sink, Paul just offered a silent prayer for its crew's future reincarnation. He sheathed his own blade, turning away from the sinking vessel. Meanwhile, on the ship bisected by Charlotte's sword. Damn it! Who the hell was that? The pirate captain, stranded on the broken hull, roared in frustration as he watched the other ship sail away. Captain! Hurry! Get in the boat. His first mate, already in a small dinghy, yelled at the captain still standing on the wreckage. The captain glared at the ruined remains of his ship. I don't care who you are. I, Hart, will remember this. Just wait and see. With that, Hart jumped into the sea and swam towards the first mate's boat. Once aboard, he ordered, let's go. He knew the small boat couldn't hold everyone. Sacrifices had to be made. Hearing the captain's command, the first mate hesitated for a moment, then quickly grabbed the oars and began rowing away. Captain! We haven't boarded yet. Wait for us. The pirates struggling in the water cried out as their captain abandoned them, but Hart turned a deaf ear. Bastard, The betrayed pirates cursed, but they were powerless, clinging desperately to anything that would float. He ignored the insults hurled behind him. To heart, these pirates were expendable resources. All he had to do was announce his name, and a fresh wave of recruits would flock to his banner. He'd never lacked for low-level grunts. Damn it! Hart slammed his fist against the wooden boat, not mourning his crew, but lamenting the loss of the foundation he'd worked so hard to build. A month at sea, wasted. Boss! Aska Islands ahead. Charlotte, who had been fishing at the side of the ship, eagerly dropped her rod and rushed to the bow. After a month of drifting, they had finally reached Aska Island. My dear seven-star sword, your master is coming. Charlotte stood at the bow, anticipation building. She eagerly awaited the surprise the seven-star sword would offer. As they drew closer, Charlotte noticed a flag on the island, the seagull flag, the symbol of the Marines. There was a naval base here. Charlotte frowned, considering the implications. Okay, everyone, disguise ourselves as a merchant ship. Don't reveal our pirate identity, understood? Charlotte addressed her crew, noticing their excitement. She wanted to avoid trouble so close to her goal, and retrieve the seven-star sword. Then, if she wanted to wipe this naval base off the map, she would. Paul and the others nodded, seeing Charlotte's seriousness. It was rare to see their boss so focused, so they would comply. They weren't entirely sure why she was so invested in this island, but they had sensed her determination over the past few days. The ship slowly approached the port. They attracted no undue attention. The harbor bustled with ships coming and going. Clearly, this island was thriving. No wonder there was a naval base present. Charlotte stood at the bow, adjusting the fake beard she had just applied, to better conceal her identity and avoid causing a stir. Charlotte had deliberately donned a golden beard. It would make her look more mature, and give off the air of a wealthy merchant. The ship docked and the gangplank was lowered. Charlotte was the first to step ashore. The people around glanced at her ornate clothes, her golden beard, and her general air of wealth. They recognized another merchant arriving, taking in the bustling port and the large mountain dominating the island center. Charlotte couldn't help but recall the island's legend. Centuries ago, the island's residents were terrified by the appearance of the red full moon. To quell their fear, the gods bestowed a shield and a sword upon the island, but tragedy struck as well. Legend had it that 3 princes of the kingdom of Aska all fell in love with the same beautiful witch. To win her affection, the 3 princes produced the god-given sword to prove their claim to the throne, the seven-star sword. A war erupted, and the earth and sea wept from absorbing the grief and resentment of countless innocent victims. The holy sword, seven-star sword, which had absorbed the resentment and blood, became a cursed demon sword, attracting only destruction and death. The cursed demon sword caused the complete annihilation of Aska country in a blood sacrifice. The war spread across the sea, turning the once beautiful waters into a realm ruled by darkness. In an effort to save everyone from the war, a shrine maiden sacrificed her life to cleanse the seven-star sword of the blood and hatred it had absorbed. In response to the death of their beloved shrine maiden, the 3 princes prayed to the gods, receiving 3 jewels from the deities, and using them to seal the destructive power of the seven-star sword. However, on the night of the red full moon, which appeared only once every 100 years, the sealed demon sword would intensify its power, reawakening to unleash its destructive force. Charlotte knew these legends from watching anime in her previous life. Although the story was gruesome, Charlotte didn't care. From the anime, she remembered that the seven-star sword granted immense power to its wielder, sparking her interest. She wondered how it might change her own abilities. From her previous life, Charlotte knew that the seven-star sword should be sealed within an altar belonging to a primitive tribe, guarded by witches and villagers throughout the ages. Finding it would be a challenge. Charlotte led her 20-plus crew members into the bustling town of Aska Island, surveying the vibrant streets. Chapter 84, Aska Island. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Charlotte couldn't help but think of his hometown, Kame Island. Haven't been back in years. I wonder how it's doing. He glanced around, figuring the best place to get information was a tavern. All right. Drinks are on me. Charlotte waved his hand, heading toward a small alley. Paul and the others exchanged glances, smiles playing on their lips, and happily followed him into the bar. The arrival of 20+ people immediately turned heads. After Charlotte found a few open spots, the bartender was over in a flash, wine list in hand. "What can I get for you, sir?" he asked, leaning in. "Bring out your best stuff. Money's no object," Charlotte said. "Ha! That's the spirit, boss," Paul called out. "Attaboy, Captain." The crew chimed in. Charlotte smiled, unfazed. He hadn't told Paul the real reason for stopping at Aska Island. The bartender, hearing Charlotte's order, happily pocketed the wine list and hurried to the bar. Soon, a mountain of bottles was piled in front of them. "All right, lads, bottoms up." Charlotte stood, brandishing a bottle, and addressed the crew. He tilted it back and took a long swig. "Yeah. That's the way." "Awesome." The crowd erupted in cheers, impressed that he downed the whole bottle without flinching. Even strangers applauded. Charlotte, feigning embarrassment, shook his head. "Drink up, everyone. Drink." Paul and his men grabbed their bottles and followed suit. The place was jumping, the other drinkers joined in, and the whole bar became one big party. Charlotte watched it all, knowing this was exactly what he wanted. "Hey, pal. First time on Aska Island. Heard some crazy stories about this place. Any truth to them?" Charlotte asked, stopping a big guy with a playful, drunken slur. The burly man gave him a bleary look. "Nah, man. All tourist hype, you know." "Really? So the witch stories are bogus too?" Charlotte asked, acting disappointed. "Well," the guy grinned, "the 7-star sword might be a fake, but we got witches on this island, all right." "Oh yeah? Where? Show me the way. If I see a real witch, drinks are on me," Charlotte offered, waving his hands like he was tipsy. The big guy's eyes lit up. "Thing is, there's this village up in the mountains, kinda old school, see? Some of the villages up there still got witches. And the current one's a looker. I saw her once, from a distance. Trust me, she's off the charts." He grabbed Charlotte's shoulders, giving him a knowing look. "Seriously? Where? Think a guy could get a look at this witch?" Charlotte pressed, playing the eager fool. The big guy chuckled, taking a long pull from his bottle. Charlotte knew what that meant. "Hey, barkeep. Bring us your best stuff," Charlotte yelled. Then, using his abilities, he scanned the guy's mind. Another sucker, huh? Free booze, here I come, Charlotte almost drew his sword right then, but he kept his cool, thinking of the 7-star sword. "So, about that village, how does a fella find it? Wanna check out this witch?" he said, feigning impatience. The big guy smirked. "That village is way out there, cut off from everything. Only guys who hunt in the mountains know the way. And I just happen to be one of them." He puffed out his chest, looking pleased with himself. Charlotte wanted to smack him. He probed the guy's mind again. And this time, he got a clear picture of the village's location. It was on the far side of the island. No wonder nobody knew about it. And he remembered something about cliffs, a really isolated place. Suddenly frowning, Charlotte unleashed a wave of conqueror's hockey. The big guy froze, then collapsed to the floor, foaming at the mouth. The other patrons barely glanced over, figuring he'd just had too much to drink. Charlotte, expressionless again, walked back to his table. Only those who knew Charlotte understood what had happened. The foaming mouth wasn't from booze, it was from his hockey. Paul watched Charlotte, noticing his frown. He walked over, glass in hand. "Everything okay, Captain?" he asked quietly. Charlotte looked at the guy on the floor and curled his lip in disgust. "That guy's a lost cause." "Fine. Just keep drinking," Charlotte said. Seeing his boss wasn't in the mood to talk, Paul shrugged and went back to his friends. Charlotte was already planning his next move. He knew the route now, thanks to the big guy's memories. He could go anytime, but looking at his crew, already plastered, he decided to wait until morning. Then he dragged them all to the isolated village. Downing his drink, he decided to relax a little. He'd been at sea for over a month, mentally and physically drained. He needed to unwind. Lost in thought, Charlotte drank alone, only occasionally chatting with his crew when they wandered over. Chapter 85 Aska Island. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Soon, Charlotte got completely wasted and passed out face down on the table. I have no idea how long she slept, until the next day. A racket woke Charlotte up. She frowned, squinting at the bright sky. Charlotte was already annoyed at having to get up, and only the thought of keeping a low profile kept her from cursing a blue streak. Suddenly needing to pee, Charlotte lurched to her feet, feeling dizzy. She shook her head to clear it, and asked the bartender at the front desk for directions to the bathroom. Afterward, Charlotte felt fantastic. She checked the time, only 6 a.m, and glanced at the crew sprawled on the floor. Charlotte strolled over to Paul and gave him a kick. Ugh! Paul sat up groggily, clutching his head, which felt like it was splitting open. Charlotte, sipping tea at a clean table, watched him. Finally awake, Charlotte's voice was casual. Paul blinked, startled. Boss, he spotted her drinking tea by herself. Rouse the others, we're moving out, Charlotte told Paul without looking up. Paul nodded, knowing better than to ask where they were going. If the boss wanted him to know, she'd tell him. Wake up. Rise and shine. Paul went over to Isaac and booted him in the ribs. Woken by the kick, Isaac snapped to attention, staring blankly at Paul. Get up. We're hitting the road with the boss, Paul said. Hearing it was the boss's orders, Isaac swallowed whatever he was going to say, got up quietly, and started waking the others. Most of the crew were pretty much back to normal after a night's sleep, and they all came around when roused. Before long, the crew members who followed Charlotte were all up. Boss. They're all awake. Paul sidled up to Charlotte and whispered. Charlotte took a sip of tea, eyeing the 20-odd people in front of her, who almost filled the tavern's open space. Charlotte stood, shrugged on a fancy coat, and tossed a bag of coins toward the door. Let's go, Charlotte, silhouetted in the doorway against the rising sun, told everyone. Everyone sensed excitement rolling off Charlotte. Even though they didn't know what was up, they all followed. They left the tavern, heading in the direction they remembered from the previous day. The 20-plus people trailing behind drew stares from the townspeople, but Charlotte ignored them, her mind fixed on the 7-star sword. Following her memory, they soon passed through the town center, emerging into a deserted area. Seeing that the surroundings matched her recollection, she chose a path and strode down it. Seeing the boss disappear into the dense forest, the others exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what she was doing. What are you staring at? Get a move on. Seeing everyone gawking, Paul barked, then he hurried after her. The others scrambled to catch up. The going was rough in the thick forest, and Charlotte wondered how Luffy had gotten through it in the original story. Had things changed in the past 40 years? Charlotte snapped off a branch, glancing around as she thought. Boss. What are we doing here? Paul, hacking at an obstructing branch with his knife, asked. I'm here for something I need. We should be there soon. It had been a full morning, and they'd crossed half the island. They should be getting close to that secluded village. Hearing what Charlotte said, everyone perked up. The road was nothing but mountain trails, either rugged or swallowed by jungle. Whoosh, star, alarm bells went off in Charlotte's head. Her left hand shot up, snatching an arrow out of the air. Someone's there. The moment they saw the arrow, Paul and Isaac drew their weapons, scanning the surroundings. Who's there? Show yourself. Paul shouted in the direction the arrow had come from. Swish, star, something moved in the undergrowth 50 yards ahead. Someone was clearly trying to reposition quickly after being spotted. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. She blurred, vanishing from sight. A moment later, Charlotte reappeared, but this time, she had someone in her hand. A kid, maybe 17 or 18. Charlotte threw him to the ground. Then planted a foot on his back. Ugh! The weight of Charlotte's foot was enough to make the kid groan. But he didn't cry out. Boy! Who are you? Why did you attack me? Charlotte stood on the kid's back, looking down at him as she spoke. The kid just glared at Charlotte, refusing to answer. Charlotte rolled her eyes. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. Charlotte bent down, grabbed the kid by the throat, and hoisted him up in a flash. The kid, barely 5'7", was instantly dangling in the air, his feet kicking. Charlotte grinned. She unleashed her mind-reading observation hockey, invading the kid's mind. She started rifling through his memories like it was nothing. He was still struggling, clueless that his mind was being violated. The subordinates behind her were confused, wondering why their boss had just grabbed the kid and wasn't asking any questions. Cap. What's the boss doing? Why isn't she interrogating him? Hearing the man beside him, Paul glared at him, then hissed. Leave the boss alone. The crew member shut up, shrinking away. After Charlotte had sifted through the memories she wanted, she tossed the kid away. He slammed into a nearby tree, coughing up blood. He slumped to the ground, out cold. Charlotte was so strong that even a casual toss was more than an average person could take. Paul watched the kid, silently pitying him. Let's go. I found it. Charlotte said excitedly. After invading the kid's memories, Charlotte had not only located the village hidden in the mountains, but she'd even seen the sealed stone chamber. Others might not know what the stone chamber was for, but there was no way Charlotte, who had watched the anime, wouldn't recognize it. That was where the 7-star sword was sealed. Seeing the boss's excitement, everyone quickly fell into line. No one dared to ruin Charlotte's mood. They moved out of the area quickly. Charlotte and the others' field of vision widened instantly. The path became easier to follow. They could even see man-made structures, like carved stone walls. These must be the ruins of the Aska kingdom. That meant Charlotte was on the right track. Chapter 86 Aska Island. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hey, just when Charlotte thought she was in the clear, people jumped out from everywhere, surrounding Charlotte and his crew of 20+, weapons drawn. Charlotte's people instantly armed themselves. Their weapons were a mixed bag: swords, flintlocks, even axes came out. The sudden appearance of this group made the villagers uneasy. The vibe these guys gave off was definitely not ordinary. Charlotte smirked at the villagers playing guard. Move or die, Charlotte said casually, but the intent to kill was impossible to miss. The guard's legs started to shake. Years of bloodshed had given Charlotte a palpable aura of death. Even a little bit of it was enough to terrify regular folks. These guys, even if they were mountain hunters, couldn't handle it. Why you? Who are you? What do you want in our village? The guard leader, bow and arrow in hand, swallowed hard. He tried to play it cool, but you could see the panic in his eyes. Charlotte grinned. You have something I need in the backwoods. Get in my way, and you're dead. Charlotte's smile only made them more scared. So, he is after the thing in the backwoods. One of the guards blurted out. Shut up. His buddies shot him a glare. He clammed up, instantly regretting his words. The rumor brought adventurers to their village every so often. Some were cool and just took a look, others were hotheads who went around killing people. They instantly pegged Charlotte as one of the hotheads. Hearing this, the guard leader sighed in relief and lowered his bow. Sir, are you here for the 7-star sword legend? Charlotte nodded. Okay then. Sir, we won't stop you from looking for the 7-star sword, just please don't hurt anyone in our village. All right. Charlotte agreed without hesitation. Of course. I'm not a killer, Charlotte said, spreading his hands wide. Everyone behind him gave him a look, like, seriously. You're the blood-sworn, Phew, the guard captain breathed another sigh of relief. This way, sir. He stepped aside, gesturing for Charlotte to pass. Charlotte walked forward, not afraid of any tricks. As they passed, one of the guards muttered. Another treasure hunter chasing some crazy legend. I hope he doesn't throw a fit when he comes up empty. He sighed. The guard captain sighed too. Charlotte, meanwhile, was getting hyped. He was about to get his hands on his first famous sword. Okay, so it was a cursed sword, but he figured a time traveler could handle it. Charlotte led the group straight to the back hill. Seeing them coming, villagers slammed their doors shut, like that would protect them. An old man sat in front of his house, watching the whole scene without a word. He was old and didn't fear death. Charlotte noticed him, but didn't stop, focused on the 7-star sword. Another one obsessed with power. It'll be the death of him, that the old man said quietly. Charlotte narrowed his eyes but kept moving. Paul, on the other hand, glared at the old man before hurrying after Charlotte. The old man just shook his head. It was noon, and Charlotte could smell the aroma of rice cooking in the villagers' homes, but he wasn't distracted. 10 minutes later, they reached an altar. As they started up the stone steps, a voice rang out. "Stop! This is a forbidden area. Stay back." Charlotte looked up and saw a blue-haired girl in silver jewelry standing in front of the altar, looking down at them. Charlotte was the leader of the group. Charlotte recognized her. It was the Shrine Maiden from the anime. A younger version, but definitely resembling the anime witch. This must be the Elder Witch. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. It had been over 3 months since he'd seen a woman. Seeing the witch was a little stimulating. "Hey, witch. I'm here treasure hunting. Heard there's a demon sword called the 7-star sword here." Charlotte asked, looking up at the blue-haired witch. The witch's expression flickered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Sir, there's no 7-star sword here. It's just a legend. This is our altar, a forbidden area. Outsiders aren't allowed," the witch said, looking at the silver-bearded man below. With his scraggly beard and fancy robe, Charlotte looked like a middle-aged merchant. "That won't do. The guard captain said it was okay." "Why can't I come up?" Charlotte asked the witch. If it was someone else, he would have already drawn his sword. He was only being polite because she was pretty. "What? Those guys let you through?" The witch looked shocked, as if betrayed. Her family had guarded the altar for generations, because the seal weakened every 100 years, and only the witches could reseal it. It was their family's mission. "That's right, witch. You gonna stop me?" Charlotte asked. Without waiting for her response, he started climbing the steps towards the altar. The witch was still stunned by Charlotte's words and didn't realize he was approaching. After a few steps, she snapped out of it. "Stop! Don't come any closer," she yelled, but Charlotte ignored her and kept walking. Chapter 87 7-Star Sword. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Miko. "You can't stop me." Charlotte, standing at 5'7", looked down at the shorter girl. He walked past her towards the altar. The girl was stunned by Charlotte's gaze. By the time she reacted, Charlotte was already heading deeper inside. "No." But as soon as she shouted, Charlotte disappeared inside. Charlotte wasn't disappointed to find only a sarcophagus in the stone room. He knew the 7-star sword was inside. Charlotte ran a hand over the sarcophagus. It felt ancient and solid. It had clearly been there for centuries. "My precious. I'm so ready for this." Charlotte gently touched the stone. Click. He placed his hands on either side and put some muscle into it. It was heavy, and didn't budge at first. A cloud of dust erupted as he moved it, disturbed after what must have been a long time. "No." The girl's eyes snapped open, and she screamed. Charlotte ignored her, putting his back into it. He lifted the top of the sarcophagus and tossed it aside. "No." The girl's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground. A wave of rot wafted up, sending a bad feeling through Charlotte. He covered his nose and tried to clear the air. He leaned in to see a double-edged longsword engraved with runes resting inside. 2 chains were wrapped tightly around it, but it was covered in rust and lacked the mesmerizing green glow he expected. He realized why no one else had found it before. Nobody would have thought that such a rusty, broken-down sword was the legendary 7-star sword. Charlotte's eyes lit up. He reached into the sarcophagus and tore the chains free with a surge of strength. Click. Star. Jingle. Star. The chains snapped. The decrepit 7-star sword lay before him, perfect in its way. Charlotte couldn't help but sigh in awe. "Don't take it out." The girl was sprawled on the ground, her ankle red and swollen from twisting it in her panic. Charlotte glanced at her, then grabbed the hilt and lifted the sword out. A green light flared along the blade. The runes seemed to come alive. The rust vanished under the glow, revealing a razor-sharp edge. The girl stared, eyes wide. It was exactly as her ancestors had described it. She'd always taken their warning to guard the demon sword to heart. The sword was supposed to awaken every 100 years, the last time being in 1520 of the Haiyuan calendar, but it was waking up early. Had this guy somehow triggered it? The moment Charlotte raised the sword, the sky went dark, the sunny day vanished in an instant, replaced by ominous dark clouds. An uneasy feeling settled over everyone. Green light pulsed. Paul stared at his boss, his eyes slightly bloodshot from the influence of the demon sword. Holding the sword high, Charlotte felt a power surge through him, a strange energy coursed through his body, a wave of bloodlust washed over him. Charlotte's eyes widened, and sweat broke out on his forehead. He was fighting the demon sword for control. He'd expected it to be evil, but he hadn't expected it to try to take over his mind. Charlotte wasn't having it. His conqueror's haki exploded outward, a red-green aura unlike anything he'd produced before, radiating outwards from him. The girl collapsed again, foaming at the mouth and unconscious. Paul, Isaac, and the crew didn't even last a second. What the? Paul choked, fell to the ground, and blacked out. The haki kept spreading, trees bent under its force. Soon, it reached the town. Ugh! 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 Townspeople fell to the ground, foaming at the mouth. Woo! The Navy branch office detected something wrong and sounded the alarm. They, too, were instantly overwhelmed. What? The colonel clutched his throat and fainted, foaming at the mouth. Even the fish and sea kings in the ocean felt it. All creatures not scared off were stunned and floated to the surface. Charlotte's haki had swept across the entire island, no small place, as evidenced by the naval presence. He struggled against the influence of the seven-star sword, eyes bloodshot. Damn it, he tried to retain his sanity. The overwhelming desire to kill threatened to consume him. Creak, star. Charlotte's teeth ground together. Then, 3 lights flickered on the priestess's chest. White light enveloped Charlotte. His mind went blank for a moment. The haki dissipated. The seven-star sword vanished from his hand. Who? Charlotte, breathing hard, looked at the unconscious girl and staggered towards her. The white light continued to shine on him. He reached her side, scooped up her limp body, and disappeared from the altar. The next day, Charlotte woke up, clutching his aching head. He realized he wasn't wearing any clothes, and there was a smooth, soft body against his chest. What? He raised a hand to his face, and noticed a new tattoo on his wrist, a long sword that was shaped like the seven-star sword. Chapter 88. Elena. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What the hell's going on? Charlotte absent-mindedly stroked the tattoo on his right wrist, ignoring the green-skinned woman next to him. As soon as he touched the tattoo, a voice in his head told him he could summon it with a thought, so, Charlotte tried it. With a flick of his wrist, a long sword covered in green runes materialized in his hand. Charlotte scrambled to his feet. The woman slid off him and landed on the ground. Charlotte stared at the sword in disbelief. It could shrink down and become a tattoo. Was this some kind of Xianxia fantasy? He vaguely remembered a TV show where weapons could be worn like tattoos. Did he just get the seven-star sword? And how? He looked down and saw the naked woman stir on the ground. Looking around, Charlotte realized he was in a cave. He caught a whiff of blood. Following the scent, he saw a pool of blood where they'd been lying. Looking at the blood, then at the woman's marked body, then his own, the pieces clicked. Wow. He barely felt a thing. Seriously, though, this wasn't the time to dwell on it. He did remember seeing 3 flashes of white light when the seven-star sword took over, and they seemed to come from 3 white crystals around the woman's neck. He looked at her chest, but saw only white flowers. Then, the woman on the ground opened her eyes. Instantly, she registered the pain down below. Ugh, she frowned, then noticed Charlotte standing naked beside her. She screamed and covered her eyes. Then, realizing she was naked, too, and that he was still staring, she shrieked. Turn around. Don't look. Frantically, she grabbed at her scattered clothes to cover herself. Charlotte gave her a lingering glance, then slowly turned away. As soon as his back was turned, she scrambled to gather her clothes. The rustling sounds filled the cave, but Charlotte ignored her, focusing on the seven-star sword. He thought about it, and the sword vanished, reappearing as a tattoo on his wrist. Behind him, the woman finished dressing. Okay. You can turn around now, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her face flushed. She knew what had happened. Her heart felt like it had turned to ice. She wanted to die, but some instinct told her to connect with the man who had just taken her virginity. Charlotte turned and looked at her, his expression complicated. What was he supposed to say? He couldn't deny he felt like he'd won the lottery. She was gorgeous, in a kind of exotic way, plus, there was something about her that drew him in, it made him feel good. Hearing him move, she glanced up, and when she saw him, she gasped. Ah! You! Why aren't you wearing any clothes? Her face went crimson again. Charlotte rolled his eyes. His clothes were under her, weren't they? Move! You're sitting on my clothes. He said, his voice low. She looked down. Ah! She scrambled to her feet, wincing with pain. She lost her balance and started to fall, right towards Charlotte. He instinctively reached out and caught her, pulling her into his arms. They stared at each other, his eyes playful, hers filled with shame and anger. After a long moment, he helped her stand, then, he bent down and grabbed his clothes, pulling them on as if she wasn't there. The woman turned away, Charlotte ignored her, and finished dressing. Then he looked at her, her blue hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her silver headdress lay forgotten on the ground. He watched her, thinking about his next move. He was claiming this woman as his. After what had just happened, he was taking her with him. He wouldn't abandon her, even if it was an accident. He had to be responsible. That's just who he was. Even if she fought him, thinking about it, was this what he got with the sword? A buy one get one free deal. Hey, he could deal with a gorgeous woman. What's your name? His voice echoed in the cave. She turned slowly, her eyes troubled. What's your name? He repeated. She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. Irina. Irina, High Priestess of Aska Island. Irina looked at him, her voice thick with emotion. My name is Charlotte. Rockefeller Charlotte. I'm a pirate. Charlotte introduced himself. A bolt of lightning crashed in Irina's mind. She covered her mouth to stifle a cry, tears streaming down her face. She never imagined the man who had taken her was a pirate. Seeing her reaction, Charlotte felt a pang of guilt. He could almost feel her pain, her heartbreak. It made him feel like garbage. I'll take responsibility for you. You're with me now. He blurted out, surprised by his own words. She stopped crying, staring at him. We just met. You're going to take me with a pirate? A pirate who forced himself on me? Ha! She laughed bitterly, her heart ached. That gut-wrenching pain, Charlotte felt it, too. They were in sync somehow. Yeah. I'm a pirate. Even if you don't want to come, I'll force you. You're mine now. And you're not going anywhere, he said, his voice hard. 89 combined 2 into 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Elena didn't stand a chance. Charlotte grabbed her and dragged her outside. Let me go. You snake. Let me go. Elena thrashed, but Charlotte's grip was like a vice. No matter how hard she struggled, it was no use. They reached a cave. Charlotte realized they were on the mountainside, facing a sheer drop. There was no way down, but that wasn't a problem for Charlotte. He scooped up the still struggling Elena in a princess carry. Put me down. Put me down. Elena kept fighting, but it was useless. A smirk played on Charlotte's lips. Then, to Elena's shock, he jumped. That's right, he jumped. Ah! Terrified by his crazy move, Elena clung to him, burying her face in his chest and squeezing her eyes shut. Charlotte felt her grip tighten. He smiled slightly and tapped his toes. He was stepping on air, floating downwards. Elena, curled up in his arms like a scared bird, kept her eyes tightly closed. Charlotte chuckled. Hey! Wake up! We're on the ground. He looked at the shivering girl in his arms, catching a whiff of her delicate scent. For a moment, Charlotte was lost in thought. Hearing his gentle voice, Elena opened her eyes and looked up at his handsome face. Her cheeks instantly burned. She scrambled out of Charlotte's arms. Ouch! She lost her footing and tumbled to the ground. This time, Charlotte didn't catch her. He was amused by her innocent, awkward posture. He quickly reached out a hand to help her up, remembering he was the reason she was in this mess. He faintly recalled the craziness of the night before and felt a little dazed, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Elena's face flushed when she saw his outstretched hand, but she just huffed. Humph! Ignoring him, she stood up on her own. Charlotte, amused by her reaction, withdrew his hand. Elena looked around, quickly realizing where she was. Then she started walking in one direction. Charlotte followed, sensing him behind her. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes for some reason. She broke into a run. Charlotte followed, keeping his distance. He could tell she was still confused. What Charlotte had done was upsetting, unacceptable to any girl. He'd give her time to cool off. Following her, Charlotte quickly left the rocky area and reached the village. He hadn't expected her to lead him all the way here. 4 or 5 people were lying unconscious at the edge of the village. Charlotte recognized them as the village guards. Aman, seeing them, Elena hurried over, shaking them. Charlotte walked over and looked at the men on the ground. He understood what had happened right away. They'd been stunned by his overwhelming presence. Serves them right, didn't it? Aman. Elena was frantic. Aman, jolted awake by her shaking, opened his eyes. High Priestess, he held his head, looking up at her. What happened? He shook his head throbbing. Seeing him awake, Elena moved to the next man and shook him. Charlotte grimaced. Was that really okay? But he was wrong to worry. One by one, they all woke up after Elena shook them. They looked around, confused, then all glared warily at Charlotte. Once everyone was awake, Elena ran into the village. She saw the villagers lying unconscious on the ground, one after another. Everyone's tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at them. Hey! They're not dead. Don't freak out. They'll wake up in a bit. Charlotte went to her side. Hearing his voice, Elena spun around and glared at him. Whoa! Taken aback by her hateful stare, Charlotte froze. Elena bit her lip, fighting back tears, and headed towards the mountain behind the village. She reached the back mountain. Boss! Boss! Paul and the others shouted when they saw Charlotte. When they'd woken up, they'd found that only they were left at the altar. The boss and the witch were gone. They'd panicked since they didn't know the area. Paul decided they should wait for Charlotte where they were, and sure enough, he'd shown up, with the witch in tow. Charlotte nodded, but ignored them, focusing on Elena. She ran to the sarcophagus and stared at the empty interior. She quickly turned to Charlotte. Give back the 7-star sword, she said, her voice cold. Charlotte was taken aback by her indifference. This woman's attitude had completely changed. What a fickle creature. Charlotte shook his head. The 7-star sword is mine now. There's no way I'm giving it back. He looked her in the eye as he spoke. Elena bit her lip and finally burst into silent tears. Seeing her crying, Charlotte panicked. Then he reconsidered. With a flick of his wrist, a green longsword nearly 7 feet long appeared in his hand. The moment the 7-star sword materialized, everyone felt a strange aura. Paul and Isaac exchanged shocked glances. Demon blade! Isaac exclaimed. He couldn't contain himself any longer. Charlotte glanced at him but said nothing, keeping his eyes on Elena. This sword is now a part of me. Where I am, it is. To break the sword. Charlotte raised the 7-star sword. A strange look flashed across his face. Everyone was disturbed by his bewitching expression. They sensed something dark and alluring about him. Elena looked at the 7-star sword in his hand and remembered his words. She stared at him. Her expression conflicted. Chapter 90. Be My Woman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. And Charlotte just kept staring at Irina. Come with me. Be my woman. Charlotte walked right up to Irina, who was a good 5'7", and looked down at Irina's curvy figure. Elena laughed, a sad, hollow sound, when she heard Charlotte's demand. You want me to be a pirate's girl? Charlotte frowned, concern on her face as she listened to Elena. You don't get a say in this, Charlotte said to Elena, each word sharp and clear. If he couldn't win her heart, then he'd just take her, and love would grow in time. Then Charlotte grabbed Elena's wrist, ignoring her struggles. Let go of me. Let me go, you bastard. Elena hammered at Charlotte with her fist, but Charlotte barely felt it. It was like being tapped on the chest with a kitten's paw, soft and insignificant. Behind Charlotte, Paul and the others exchanged weird glances. What were they missing? What had happened? Ignoring Elena's resistance, Charlotte turned to Paul and the others. It's done. Let's head back to Hive Island, Charlotte told them. Then, to the shock of Paul and the others, the boss picked up Elena and started walking. Paul and the others snapped to attention and hurried after him. Paul! What the heck just happened with the boss? Paul shot Isaac a surprised look. Didn't you see it? That witch has got something on the boss. Maybe that's why he came here, for her. She might be our captain's old lady someday. So, knock it off. Paul whispered in Isaac's ear. Isaac stared at Paul, blank-faced. Paul sighed at Isaac's expression. Too much time with those swords, not enough upstairs. Isaac got that message loud and clear. Paul, what are you saying? Isaac asked, keeping his voice down. Paul just shook his head, cut off the conversation, and walked away from Isaac. He needed to put some space between them, like he might catch stupidity if he stood too close. Isaac frowned at Paul's actions, but shrugged it off and quietly followed Charlotte. They passed through the village and saw villagers waking up, groggy and confused. They saw Charlotte striding ahead, carrying the high priest, and the high priest was still struggling in his arms. This was completely unacceptable. Stop! Let the high priest go. Without thinking twice, several teenagers, about Charlotte's age, jumped out, hoes and sickles raised, blocking Charlotte's path. Before Charlotte could say anything, Elena, seeing the teenagers, cried out, "No! Get out of here! You're no match for this monster." Hearing Elena's voice only riled up the teenagers even more. Put Elena down. One of the teenagers stepped forward, glaring at Charlotte. Charlotte frowned, then his gaze sharpened, and his domineering aura washed over them in a wave of reddish-green energy. Ugh! 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 The teenagers crumpled to the ground. No! Elena screamed. She thought Charlotte had somehow killed them. She started fighting even harder in Charlotte's arms. You bastard! I'm going to kill you! Kill you! Elena clawed at Charlotte's face, her eyes wild. Shut up, you idiot! They just fainted. Charlotte quickly grabbed Elena's flailing hands, but when the surrounding villagers saw Charlotte knock out the teenagers, their eyes narrowed in fury. They made the same mistake as Elena. Attack! Attack! Kill the invader and save the high priest. The entire village, old and young, men, women, and children, charged towards Charlotte with whatever they could find, kitchen knives, pitchforks, and clubs. Seeing this, Paul and the others drew their weapons, forming a defensive ring. Charlotte watched the villagers rushing at him with their pathetic weapons and frowned. To keep things simple, Charlotte released a massive wave of his reddish-green domineering aura, targeting each villager precisely. Ugh! 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 Hundreds of villagers dropped like flies. Gulp. Paul and the others swallowed hard. They could feel that the boss's domineering aura had grown even stronger, and it had changed color. It was now a reddish-green. They could sense a crazy, unsettling edge to it. It was clearly different from anyone else's aura. As members of the Rocks Pirates, they were used to feeling that energy, but Charlotte's was something else entirely. Even Charlotte felt it. His own domineering aura had shifted. What was going on? But this wasn't the time to think about it. Holding Elena tightly, he stepped over the fallen villagers and walked out of the village. Elena remained silent and limp in his arms. She was still in shock. Charlotte carried her to the village entrance. All the remaining villagers stared at him, stunned by his display of power. You're a monster, Elena cried out, her eyes wide. That's right. I'm the devil. And if you try to resist, these villagers of yours will die. Charlotte said, looking down at the girl. The strange light in his eyes seemed to deepen. Elena froze, paralyzed with fear. Seeing her reaction, Charlotte couldn't help but grin. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Charlotte laughed and headed towards the port. The jungle ahead was no obstacle to him. Charlotte and his crew quickly passed over the mountain and arrived at the town, but when she saw it, Charlotte stopped dead in his tracks. The streets were crawling with Marines. People were passed out on the ground and being helped by others. Who goes there? The Marines noticed Charlotte and his group as soon as they entered the town. They were armed to the teeth and clearly up to no good. Their leader was carrying a woman who looked like she'd been crying. things were about to get messy. Swish. The Marines drew their weapons instantly, and Charlotte's crew gripped their own, ready to fight.